A married mother of two admits she sexually assaulted two 15-year-old hockey players who she met in a hotel hot tub while on a staycation with her family. After that, she says she showed up at the boys' hockey game and kept messaging one on Snapchat, begging him not to tell police. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. This is 39-year-old Allison Leigh Schardin of Blaine, Minnesota. That's just north of the Twin Cities. Back in January, her family decided to have a weekend out of the house, so they booked a hotel room in nearby Roseville, Minnesota. The same weekend, a traveling hockey team from Colorado was in town for a tournament, and they were also staying in that same hotel. Schardin met several of these hockey players on January 13th and reconnected with them the following day. Now, according to court documents, several boys went to the hotel pool area after a team dinner, and at the time, Schardin was in the sauna. Because the boys were all underage, they're listed as victims 1, 2, and 3 in the court documents. Victim 1 said that rather than go to the pool right away, he was in his room packing for their return trip home the next day when he received a photo of Schardin from a teammate with a message telling him you wouldn't believe what happened and telling him to come down to the pool area and hang with the team, so he did. Schardin then got in the hot tub with the boys and began talking to them about the problems she's having with her husband. She said they were trying to work it out, but her husband hits her. She told the boys that she'd cheated on her husband just a few weeks prior and had sex with a junior hockey player, meaning he was in the 18 to 20-year-old range. During all this, Schardin's husband actually came to the pool area and yelled words to the effect of, "If you don't come upstairs, our relationship is over." At about 10 o'clock, the boys left the pool area to make their curfew, but 3 of them snuck out of their rooms to meet up with Schardin at the pool once again. They saw her husband for a second time here too. He came down and started talking about it being the last chance for their marriage. Okay, I know you're multitasking when you're watching our videos, but if you're out and about running errands, listen up. This one's for you. I have to tell you about the free app Upside that gets you cash back on daily essentials. I use it every time I pump gas because it's so easy and free to use, so why not? All you have to do is download the Upside app and claim an offer for whatever you're buying. So you pay as usual and then just follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on the screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. After this, court documents say the boys left the pool again and headed for victim 1's room. A little while later, he got a Snapchat message from Schardin saying she'd gotten into an argument with her husband and that she wanted to come to the boys' room. 2 of the teammates did not want Schardin to come to the room, but victim 1 said he agreed to let her come because her husband was abusive and she needed help. So a few of the boys left, leaving only victims 1, 2, and 3 with Schardin. At this time, she told the boys she was scared of her husband, but ended up leaving the room again for about an hour. When she returned, Schardin allegedly ended up in bed with victims 1 and 2. At this point, Schardin continued to ask the boys sexual questions, including how sexually active they were, and specifically asked victim 3 what sexual things he liked to do with his girlfriend. During this conversation, Schardin asked the boys about their ages. The boys told her they were 15 and she told them she was 38, saying they were young enough to be her kids. Now, according to court docs, after this, things then escalated. Schardin told the boys they could touch her breasts, and both victim 1 and victim 2 did. After that, she took off her pants and asked victim 1 to explore down there. Both victims 1 and victim 2 touched her between her legs and they also kissed her. Later, she asked victims 2 and 3 to leave her alone with victim 1, so these boys went into the bathroom. As they were leaving, Schardin asked victim 3 if he had a condom, but he didn't. Victim 1 later said he was thankful because he did not want things to go that far, and Schardin was insisting on them having sex. Victim 2 and victim 3 each said they peeked around the corner from the bathroom and saw Schardin, who was nude, with victim 1's penis in her mouth. Victim 2 also said he heard Schardin asking victim 1 to do the same to her, but victim 1 declined. After that, he digitally penetrated her. Now, during all this, victim 1 told police that Schardin was saying things like, "Let's just do more. Let's have sex. We're already here. You already have a 38-year-old woman, a female, in your bed. Don't you want to do more?" He said that in his head, his response was not really, but he responded by saying sure, though he wasn't totally on board with it. Schardin finally left when victim 1 told her he had to go to sleep because he had a game the next day. When it came time for that game, though, Schardin messaged the boys asking them what rink it was at. The boys didn't want to see her, so they told her that their team had already lost, but a short time later, she walked in. Victim 1 said they all started getting nervous, and he was shaking on the bench at one point because he wanted to leave what happened the night before in the past, and she was trying to follow them. Quote, "It was really creepy." After that, the boys returned home to Colorado, but Schardin kept messaging them. She texted victim 1 saying something to the effect of, "I will do or say anything you want, just don't tell the police or report what happened." Victim 1 told her he wouldn't tell the police and just asked to be left alone, and after that, he blocked her. It was victim 2 who reported Schardin to the police on January 22nd, showing investigators a Snapchat conversation between them. The messages discuss victim 1 and whether he's mad at Schardin. Schardin then went on to apologize for going to their game and also said, "I didn't know he didn't want me to. I feel so bad, too. Ugh, he regrets getting his first blowjob." On February 1st, Schardin was arrested. When police questioned her, she actually owned up to everything. Schardin told investigators that when she met the boys, they asked for her social media handles, and she felt flattered and was happy to have the attention. She also admitted to going into a hotel room with 3 underage boys and claimed they asked her to take her clothes off. She also admitted to lying in bed with one of the boys, saying they were, quote, "kissing, and I gave him oral sex, and I think he fingered me for a little bit, and that was it." She also admitted to asking for a condom, but said she wasn't going to go through with it. Schardin said, "I think things were starting to progress, and I think I thought about it for a moment, and then I was just like, yeah, no, that's not." And I think at that point, it was pretty evident that victim 1 was kind of uncomfortable. Schardin was charged with criminal sexual misconduct in the 3rd degree and criminal sexual conduct in the 4th degree. She pleaded not guilty to these charges back in May, but just last week, she reached a plea deal with prosecutors. As part of this deal, Schardin pleaded guilty to the charge of criminal sexual misconduct in the 3rd degree, and the charge of criminal sexual misconduct in the 4th degree was dismissed. So what's next for Schardin? Could she spend time behind bars? And what led up to this crime in the first place? Here's where we bring in trial attorney Krista Ramey. I guess I just want to start with the question about this shocking crime. I mean, anytime we're talking about sexual assault, especially of minors, is really tough to stomach. But this one is even a bit more crazy. It almost seems like a crime of opportunity happenstance that she just happened to meet these boys at a hotel. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's very random, and it's in terms of it's the targets of the crime. Typically, when women abuse, they kind of fall into 2 categories, kind of like a predator, like a narcissistic, the typical like what you think of for a molester, and then what I'll call like a teacher lover kind of category, which is we think of a teacher typically in this category. But I think this one is more kind of like just someone for similar reasons. Younger men are easier to control potentially, that they find them less threatening. She's having problems in her marriage. It was really a crime of opportunity in that sense. So you have someone who is themselves vulnerable and is going through whatever troubles they're going through, and then comes upon these 15-year-old boys and views them as a way to maybe comfort her, and then she can control them. And it sounds like that's what happened here.
You mentioned she was having some struggles in her marriage, and this is laid out through the affidavit as well. But apparently at the time, she was staying at this hotel as a staycation with her husband, who she was having troubles with, and then her 2 children. And that's what's interesting to me is she later tells these boys, "You guys could be the age of my kids. That's the age disparity between the 2 of us." And she actually left her kids to go hang out with these boys and sexually assault them. I mean, is there some irony there at least?
Well, it's very twisted, to be sure. I think at one point, even the husband hollers down or comes out to the pool and sees her and says, "If you don't get upstairs right now, our marriage is done," or something to that effect. Technically, yes, I guess she is old enough. She was reported to be 38 years old at the time. And the boys are, almost half her age, 15. So yes, I guess technically, I think that, this is like the cougar mentality, I guess, that some women have, like, I, want to be with younger men or whatever, but just taking it 10 steps too far with these young boys. And yeah, very ironic for sure. And twisted.
Taking it too far is a really great term for this case because that's really what happened. And it started just with normal conversation, but then it became they were exchanging social media handles or cell phones and they were talking via Snapchat. That to me, just unto itself, seems a bit inappropriate that we have this 38-year-old woman and these 15-year-old, 16-year-old boys. I mean, is that a red flag unto itself?
Yeah, and it's actually grooming behavior too. So she's, getting them comfortable with her and say, it's like, hey, I've got Snapchat too. I've got all these socials as well. Let's exchange, information. It's getting them comfortable in the environment and comfortable with communicating with her and making them feel like she's really just one of them. And, it's part of that predator, way to persuade or way to get these boys to feel comfortable enough to next step, invite her up to their room.
I mean, it's one thing to be talking to these boys and flirting with them and Snapchatting them. I mean, we did say that's crossing the line, but that's a bit different than sexually assaulting them and going to the next level of actually going to their room and following through with this assault. I mean, how do these people make the jump from I'm just going to text and flirt to I'm going to sexually assault this teenager?
Sarah, this is something that you and I will never understand because that's just not how our mind is wired. And I firmly believe that predators, particularly pedophiles, adults that target children as their victims, have narcissistic, sociopathic tendencies. They have diagnosable DSM-5, conditions that are on whatever psychological issue that they're having. This is not something that happens with a normal person that is well adjusted, or even someone who is struggling and having their own issues. Maybe also DSM-5 diagnosable conditions, but is coping and dealing with things. These people that are predators, they are narcissistic, sociopathic, and it's about control and comfort that they have. Predators typically put themselves in a place to be around their victims, around children. She'd mentioned, I think in the news story it came out, she'd mentioned to these boys that she was with another young boy that, not too long before them, maybe someone who is as young as 18 or 20 years old. Now, while, we can talk about, the infidelity there, whatever, you put moral judgments on that, at least it's not legally repugnant, in terms of the law. But she obviously has some sort of, diagnosable condition that I'm sure a psychologist could talk to us about in greater detail.
I think one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this is the boys who were involved in this. Obviously, this is something that has really shaped them and affected them. And reading through the affidavit, it was just so troubling to hear one of these boys identified as victim one. He was 15 years old. He later told investigators, I wanted to say no. I wasn't into it. I wasn't comfortable, but she just made me feel like I had to say yes. I mean, is that something that we see often in these situations because there's a person of authority or at least age compared to the victims that are younger and feel like they can't voice their concerns?
I think that that is almost universally true, particularly when you're talking about someone of authority that's like a teacher or a police officer or a priest that, I've seen a lot of my cases. In those cases, you definitely have someone that these boys feel like they can't say no to, but she's a similar figure, right? She's an older woman that's, around the age of probably their teachers, people that, she probably, her picture she looks totally unassuming. She looks very like someone that I might, know. And so she's not threatening looking, but she's, but she's an authority figure to them. And so that makes it very hard to say no. And, once you're there, when you're that young, your brain is not wired that way. Like as a grown woman, I know that I can say no very comfortably. I know that looking back, even in my 20s, those boundaries are harder to define. And so when you're 15 years old, those boundaries are really difficult to define. And the damage that this has caused these boys will probably not be known until they're themselves in their 30s and 40s.
It's so tough to think about because, as you said, they're going to be struggling with this likely for some time, the fallout of what happened. And what's interesting about the situation is she had the relations with them ahead of time, meeting them at the pool, the sauna, whatever. And then she has sexual relations with them at the hotel. And then the next day, they were in town for this hockey tournament. She shows up at the rink for their game or their match. I mean, isn't that almost taking it to another level? The fact, I don't want to say stalking, but she's following these boys.
I think that that is part of the, she later then texted the boys as well. Don't tell the police, and one of the boys ended up blocking her. Don't worry, I'm not going to, and blocked her. So I think that that was more the intimidation after the fact that, she knew she did something wrong. She wants to make sure that these boys don't talk. So she shows up and like, I know how to find you. I've got you. And so that's the threatening aspect of it. That's part of the control.
You mentioned that she reached out to these boys after the fact when they went home to Colorado. She stayed in Minnesota, and that's true. We do have the reports that she was messaging one boy, "Don't tell police." And to me, that's screaming consciousness of guilt. You know something's wrong, don't tell the police. I mean, if it was okay, why would you even text that? Do you think that that was an example of consciousness of guilt?
It's very good examples, actually, like in the law, in law school, you know, that, to follow up on that, she really, there was so much against her that, I think that she ended up pleading to third degree sexual abuse and, rightfully so. She knew what she was doing was wrong going into this. And by the way, any 38-year-old woman that is in a hot tub with 15-year-old boys exchanging just information with them knows that it's wrong. So, when they take it a step further, she certainly knew that it was wrong. That's just kind of common sense, I think. But that certainly does show consciousness of guilt. Don't tell on me.
It's very concerning to say the least, but when she does speak to investigators, it's almost like she admits to everything, but in a nonchalant type of way, like, oh, yeah, like it wasn't a big deal. I liked the attention. And then, yeah, I guess we had oral sex, but that was really it. I mean, what do you make of her reaction there? She's admitting to it, but kind of playing it off.
I think that sometimes people think that they, can talk their way out of something, that it's not as bad. Maybe it's not as bad as it seems. These boys are not 11 or 12, they're 15, maybe closer to 16. They look like men. It was harmless. It wasn't like we actually had sex. I think that that's kind of about talking, maybe trying to talk an investigator out of things. You see this happen all the time when we watch, crime shows and during the investigation, interrogation, as attorneys, we're always telling our clients, don't say anything to the police ever. And, then you have, at the trial, the DA saying, why didn't they talk? Isn't that a sign of guilt? They asked for a lawyer. No, it's not. It's actually smart. And so this woman is talking, trying to find her way out of it, just like, quite frankly, most perps do, quite frankly.
We also talked about the plea deal because initially, after all of this, she was charged with third degree and fourth degree sexual misconduct or assault. And then she initially pleaded not guilty, but just recently last week changed it. She took a plea deal. So one of those charges was dropped. Do you think that was the right route for her to take, given the evidence that the prosecution could have brought?
Absolutely. Owning it always is better, particularly in cases like this. This is going to get her less jail time. It's going to get her quicker into probation and out of jail. Um, and jail time these days is in most bigger cities. You're actually serving less time than you're pleading to, or the judge is sentencing you to, because of overpopulation in prisons. So she's going to get out earlier. She's going to be on probation. Now she's going to be a registered sex offender for the rest of her life. That's just a reality of it. But at least she can get back to her life. And so I think that it was very smart. It would have came with a much stiffer penalty. If it would have went to trial, she probably would have gotten convicted on a much higher charge. And, there's multiple victims, and judges don't go easy on this.
I mean, if it did go to trial too, that could have been so just mortifying for these boys who have to come up, likely testify, go through and talk about this horrible event that happened in their life. Do you think that's something that prosecutors would have had in mind? We don't want to have to re-victimize these boys and put them on the stand.
Attorneys, whether they're doing this in the civil sphere or in the criminal sphere, are always thinking about that, the re-traumatization. We ourselves experience secondary trauma when we're representing these victims oftentimes. And there are courses that attorneys can actually take with therapists on trauma-informed interviewing skills, trauma-informed, lawyering. I'm often talking to my own staff about how to, if a client is being like uncooperative or retreating, victims have flight, fight, fawn, and freeze responses to trauma. And you don't know what someone is experiencing in that moment. And you've got to be patient and let people tell things in their own way and at their own speed and time. And then you've got to get them really comfortable doing it. And it is very hard for the survivor of that assault to have to go through. So I think a smart prosecutor is thinking about that, but you're also not wanting to compromise your case too much because you want to make sure that someone like this is being punished appropriately to protect other potential victims that could be out there. You're representing the people, you're not representing that victim. So it's a balance for sure. But since the, victims' constitutional rights of Victims' Bill of Rights, rather, I should say, have been, put into place in almost all states. Victims have a lot more say and work a lot more closely with DAs now when these cases go to trial and on whether they go to trial.
You're right. I do think that it's a pretty big balancing act here, but it does seem that justice is going to be served because, again, she pled guilty, so is now convicted of this crime. She's up against 8 months of jail time. What do you think would go into her sentencing there?
Well, they're going to look at, one, that she did plea and owned it. They're going to look at her history. They're going to look at, the fact that there was, another younger boy, but not a minor, that will come into play. The judge will consider that. And they'll consider, her any kind of psychological issues that she has. There might be a therapist that testifies. All of that's going to play a role. But also on the flip side, all of the, what the victims have to say about it, what their parents have to say about it, how this has impacted them. The judge is also going to give that probably greater weight on the other end. So, the impact that her crime has had on the individuals that she committed those crimes against are definitely going to play a role in what the judge decides to do.
Allison Schardin now faces a maximum of 8 months behind bars. She's set to be sentenced on January 10th of next year. For Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.